They've been campaigning against such laws for years, and now one of their own has been caught in the net.
In conducting investigations.
Mohammed Rabbani is a director for the CAGE human rights advocacy group. He was detained while at Heathrow airport last month for refusing to let officials examine his phone and laptop.
When the police asked me, I reassured them on numerous occasions that there's nothing unlawful on my devices, and I'm actually comfortable in showing them if they really insist. But I again reiterated that what may be on my devices is in connection to the work that I do, and they know where I work. I mean, I'm part of CAGE. CAGE has a long history in conducting investigations and assisting victims of torture and abuse.
Almost all are former inmates of Guantanamo Bay. Others were held at secret CIA black sites across the world. Rights groups say they are in fact victims of extraordinary rendition, as in the case of British citizen Muazzam Beg, one of the first cases taken up by CAGE. Falsely accused of being an Al-Qaeda operative, he was later tortured and interrogated under the supervision of MI5 agents. Beg was eventually released without charge and settled a compensation complaint against the UK government worth millions of dollars. He now works for CAGE and campaigns against such renditions. But security officials argue that CAGE's work brings the group into contact with what they say are potential and current terrorists and their contacts. The authorities point to the recent example of Mohammed Imwazi, also known as Jihadi John. This notorious Daesh militant of British origin was responsible for torturing and beheading several people. While CAGE argues that it's such stereotyping that pushes young alienated people towards extremism, UK authorities say the law allows them to monitor contacts with terror groups, and anyone who refuses to cooperate will be prosecuted. That's why Mohammed Rabbani has now been charged under the terror law. CAGE says it intends to fight the charges, stressing that it's necessary to protect the privacy of its clients. Shoaib Hassan, the Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Somerset, UK is international security analyst Bob Ayers, and from Brighton, the chief executive of the Ramadan Foundation, Mohammed Shafiq. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. Bob Ayers, let's begin with you. Should Mohammed Rabbani have given up his password?
If he wanted to get into the UK, yes. The Section 7 of the Terrorist Act allows border security officials to examine devices and demand passwords to those devices. That's a UK law. And the fact that the CAGE director chose to come into the UK knowing that was the law, he doesn't have much grounds to stand on saying that they shouldn't have asked him, because under UK law, they're authorized to ask him. They did, and he refused.
Okay, so Mohammed Shafiq, he disobeyed the law, and that's why he's in trouble.
Well, I think if they wanted to know what he was tweeting, they could have just gone on the Twitter public page. This is more than about CAGE and its director. It's about freedom of speech in this country. Yes, as we know, if there are people involved in terrorism or extremism, then if there is an evidence-based approach, then yeah, I'd actually agree with the proposal to stop people and ask them to share that information. But if there's no evidence whatsoever a person is involved in terrorism or extremism, you ask them for their passwords without any basis, I think is stretching it far too wide. And I think that's the problem with this whole approach from this government we have here in the UK. It's very quick to talk about draconian legislation that impedes on civil liberties, impedes on freedom of speech, but is very reluctant to talk about engaging the Muslim community on issues
so Mohammed, let me ask you,
relevant to our society.
Sure, let me ask you, Schedule 7.
Let's deal with the issue of terrorism, let's deal with the issue of extremism, but don't penalise every single Muslim.
So Schedule 7 of the Terrorism Act, are you against Schedule 7, or do you feel they've misinterpreted it, Mohammed?
I'm against the counter-terrorism proposals that tarnish every single Muslim, that makes every single Muslim a suspect in this battle against terrorism. I'm against the fact that Muslims en masse tarnished by the actions of a very small minority.
But let's not talk about Muslims en masse. Let's talk about Mohammed Rabbani. He's a director of Cage, right? Cage.
Well, Mohammed Rabbani's Mohammed Rabbani's not a terrorist.
Yeah, but again, we're not talking about the entire Muslim community having been stopped and asked for their passwords.
His advocacy work.
I'm asking you about the very specific case here. In this instance,
with respect, Mohammed Rabbani is not a terrorist. He's not an extremist. He's not involved in that sort of activity. Yes, is he involved in challenging counter-terrorism legislation? Is he involved in tackling the lack of civil liberties afforded to certain Muslims in this country? Yes, he is. Is he a hinder to the authorities? Yes, he is. But he operates within the law of this country. He's a peaceful citizen who's advocating for his clients, and we should be very careful when we, start labeling people as extremists or terrorists without any foundation.
Okay, but they haven't so far. Bob Ayers, let's look at it from this perspective. He still hasn't been charged. They kept him for more than 24 hours. Then they let him go. He still hasn't been charged. And you have this case where isn't giving up your password very similar to someone, say, conducting a wiretap on your phone? You have to have a court order. You have to have some sort of evidence or some sort of proof that the person's involved in criminal activity in order to get that warrant, right?
You're confusing different situations.
Tell me why.
You can apply for a warrant to tap a phone against a person inside the UK, and that warrant can be granted by various officials. The case here was that the Cage director was not in the UK yet. He was crossing the border.
He's a UK citizen, and isn't he also protected by the Data Protection Act, according to the law?
Stand by. I'm a UK citizen, and I've had my laptop examined when I travel to the United States by US authorities. That doesn't make me a Muslim. It doesn't make me a terrorist.
Would you give up your password?
Of course. Now, I would point out one thing. If this laptop had extremely sensitive information on it about terrorists and about the things that the organization was doing to try to counteract some of the laws they don't like, then that information, it shouldn't be put on a laptop. The laptop can be stolen, it can be lost, it can be damaged. A much better way to protect that information would be to leave it on a server somewhere else, and once you're inside the UK, access it as you need, not carry it with you. And the argument that says the man trying to come into the UK said, I'm not a terrorist, trust me. I mean, that's kind of a silly argument. What kind of a terrorist coming into the UK is going to say, I'm a terrorist, I think you should arrest me?
Okay, so let's take one of your points. Let me jump in, take one of your points and pose it to Mohammed. There's a good point there, right? If this was as sensitive as is claimed by Mohammed Rabbani, and I'm going to quote him directly, it included information information relevant to a case of torture involving the US government. So if there's something involving whistleblowing or evidence of authorities doing something terrible, why on earth would he have that on a laptop? He needed to be smarter than that, right? Would you agree with that, Mohammed?
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. Obviously, sensitive, confidential information around your clients, excuse me, is something that should be protected, and there are ways you can do that without having that information on the laptop. But, the idea that the term Muslim is somehow a dirty word, that somehow somebody who says they're Muslim somehow equates to terrorism. Muslims are the forefront of the fight against terrorism. We are the victims, day after day. In Turkey, how many cases have we had where there are so many Muslims being killed?
Let me focus again on Cage, because I don't want to go into a civilizational discussion about Muslims.
Somehow our faith is a problem with issue around terrorism.
Yes, Muslims are killed by Daesh in greater numbers than anyone else, granted, right? But I want to focus again on Cage. Might this be because of Cage's controversial background? So when you have, for example, Asim Qureshi refusing to condemn stoning to death for fornication, when you have a report that comes out and said Mwazi was a beautiful human being, that sort of thing, might Cage's history preceded it, and might that have been the reason they were targeting him? Do you think it's the case, Mohammed?
Well, I think that some of the things that you just referred to are obviously things that many of us within the British Muslim community opposed at the time. You know, we don't think it was right for Cage to do that, particularly because their work is vital. They've made a huge contribution in terms of tackling the issue around torture, around the fact that Muslims have been treated as terrorists without any due process. I think all their work, advocacy work, has been forgotten because of those mistakes. But that in itself is not justification for you to treat somebody as a criminal. Is Mohammed Rabbani involved in terrorism? No. Is he involved in extremism? No. Is he involved in advocating for people who are being tortured? Yes, he is. And then should he be free to represent his clients in the best way he sees fit? Yes, he should. But, you know, don't tarnish every single Muslim based on the actions of these terrorist groups, which obviously they don't represent our faith anyway.
Bob, does that sound reasonable to you?
Well, I think the other guest is expanding to a very global problem. I mean, we have a very, very finite and well-defined issue here, and that is a man traveling into the UK, got to the UK border point, and was asked to surrender the password to his laptop. Now, whether the man was a Muslim, a Jewish rabbi, a Catholic priest, or a cannibal from Fiji, it makes no difference.
Sure, but how many Catholic priests and how many cannibals from Fiji do they actually stop? Let's talk frankly, Bob.
Well, let's talk about Catholic priests. Remember the little problem we had in the UK called the Troubles, in which the IRA was bombing in London? There are a lot of Catholic religious people that were affiliated with the IRA. But the point is...
Are you seriously telling me you're seeing priests stopped at the airport and asked for their passwords?
We had Americans who were raising funds. If you want to talk about facts,
okay,
if you want to talk about
that's the 70s and 80s. Let's talk about today. Let's talk about today. Bob, in the context of today,
who were funding
Mohammed,
the IRA.
give us a second. Bob, in the context of today, would you accept that there's some profiling going on, Bob?
Profiling is illegal in the UK. Now, let's examine the claims that this man, if somebody would have done some research on him and looked up what he's done in the past and looked up his history, they would have realized that he probably wasn't a threat. But now let's look at the reality of the world on the UK borders. Those people that are checking people into the UK, they're checking in hundreds of thousands of people throughout all of the airports every day. They don't have time to sit down at a computer and do research on every passenger that's arriving. That's why the law empowers them to ask for passwords at the point of entry. Now, you may not like the law. You may think it's repulsive. You may think it's repressive. You may think it's intrusive.
That's a ludicrous argument.
Okay, so that's the law. Mohammed, come in. Bob, let's give Mohammed a chance. Mohammed?
Well, I think that's a ludicrous argument to use just because the resources are not there. We have intelligence agencies, we have no-fly list, we have people who are suspected of being involved in terrorism or plotting in regards to terrorist atrocities who are under surveillance. So, you know, the idea that somebody who was under surveillance appears at an airport and you can't flag him out because of that is just not true. Let's be very clear. Anybody who is involved in terrorism and extremism, I support the intelligence agencies and the police, the border agency, everybody concerned to take action against those individuals.
But you still think, Mohammed, that asking anyone whether...
actions against the people and organisation... Well, let me finish, let me finish the sentence before you interject.
Okay.
If you want to take action against those individuals, that's fine. I support that. I don't have a problem with that. But as long as it's based on evidence and it's driven by intelligence and not, you know, suspect and you know, a prejudice or in some cases just profiling, which in reality happens.
Okay, so you're okay with it up until the point where they ask anyone for a password, whether that's a Muslim or non-Muslim. Is that how I hear it, Mohammed?
No, I'm just saying it's got to be intelligence-led. It's got to be evidence-led. You can't have a situation where, you know, randomly people have been stopped just because they have a beard or they're wearing a headscarf or they happen to be of a Muslim or foreign-sounding name. Is there evidence that Mr. Joe Bloggs is involved in facilitating terrorism or funding for terrorism? That's a legitimate reason to stop that person. But Mr. Rabbani wasn't stopped because of that. They just wanted to get into his laptop to get some of his secrets, and I think that's wrong.
Okay, I'll let that be the final word because we have run out of time. We've got to move on. But gentlemen, it's been good to talk to both of you, Bob Ayers and Mohammed Shafiq. Thank you very much.